Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be discussing two major topics. The first thing we'll be talking about is how people can prepare for the impending SNAP cuts. And then in the second part of the show, we'll talk about next week's election. Denise, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So what we're going to do is jump right into the SNAP cuts because that's the most pressing thing. People need to know what's going on and at least where they can look for some help. So we're going to bring on Lance Haver to get us started with that.
Hi,
Lance, how
good
are you
evening.
tonight?
I know it's exciting election day in a couple of days, and people are looking towards the polls to give us an indication of what's happening. But I don't think we have to wait for election day to know just how bad it could be. Most people now who know about SNAP, which is the name for the food stamp program, know that President Trump has decided not to fund it because the government has shut down. There's no budget. He has found money to send to the bondholders of Argentina. He has found money to bomb people who apparently have something to do with Venezuela, although it's a little unclear to me who exactly he's killing. But he's spending money killing somebody. But he doesn't have any money to put food on the table for low-income children who are really struggling. And the SNAP program is not nothing. It's a very significant program. And if we could call up the slideshow, let me talk about how important SNAP is and who really uses SNAP, because I think part of what's happening is a lot of misinformation. And while social media has always been great to spread information you wouldn't get otherwise, it's also been horrible in terms of allowing bigots and racists to spread information. So there are almost 2 million people in Pennsylvania who benefit from SNAP directly. Indirectly, of course, are the farmers and the supermarkets and those of us who like to shop in Reading Terminal, which is the largest recipient of SNAP dollars of any retailer in the state of Pennsylvania. So 1 in 6 people get direct help from SNAP. 35% of the SNAP recipients are children, people under the age of 18. 25% are in my age category, 55 or older, and 11% SNAP have disabilities, people who cannot work. And it's not me saying they can't work, it's our government saying they can't work. Some people say, well, there are a lot of foreigners who are getting SNAP. Well, it's not true. The Democrat Bill Clinton eliminated SNAP eligibility for legal immigrants way back in 1996, and Bill Clinton, as part of his effort to get people off of welfare and off of help, said you can only get 3 months out of 36 for food stamps if you're able-bodied adult without dependents, unless you're working at least 20 hours a week or participating in a work program. Now, there have been times during recession or time during COVID where the work requirement has ended, but this was done in 1996. It's not something the Republicans are doing now. It's not something that has to be done now. It's something that was done by the Democrats way back in 1996. And just to date myself, I remember when that was a big issue. And then, of course, it became a non-issue because everyone just kind of accepted what Bill Clinton was saying. So what does SNAP really do? Not only does it put food on the table, but it lifts people out of poverty because now people have the money to pay the rent. Some people are fortunate to be low income and have a house, whether they inherited it or they figured out a way and now they've fallen into poverty. But it lifts people out of poverty, and most of the people lifting out of poverty in Pennsylvania are children. 304,000 people have been lifted out of poverty. That's a significant program. If we're a city and a state that wants to help people reach a living wage, lifting them out of poverty, whether it's through raising the minimum wage, which of course we haven't done in Pennsylvania for more than a decade, or it's by having a program like SNAP. Again, as I talked about earlier, people seem to think that, oh, it's those people, whoever those people are, who benefit from SNAP, but it's really all of us, some directly and some indirectly. 25 cents for every dollar spent to SNAP goes to farmers and ranchers. Pennsylvania agriculture is the fourth largest industry in the state. Now that's shrinking, and the farmers are really struggling. The dairy farmers, the small family farms are disappearing, but still, as of the last census tract, 25%, the fourth largest industry in the state of Pennsylvania was agriculture. There are 10,400 supermarkets. That's not counting the bodegos, not counting the corner stores, it's not counting the Wawas and Sheetz and 7-Elevens. That's 10,400 supermarkets rely on SNAP to keep their doors open. Now, in wealthier parts of the state and wealthier parts of the city, this isn't going to have much impact if SNAP is cut. But if you live in a rural area or you live in an area where the supermarket mostly is serving low-income people, that supermarket is unlikely to be able to keep its doors open. And of course, people like me and my wife who love to shop at Reading Terminal are very fortunate that people use SNAP to keep Reading Terminal doors open. The produce places, the fish places, the butchers, all of that can't stay open without the SNAP dollars. And without those type of institutions in Reading Terminal becomes just another tourist trap. Yeah, they'll still have steaks and you'll still be able to buy stuff that says, Rocky. But the real part of Reading Terminal that people like us who live in the city or live around the city use will disappear if SNAP disappears. So if you like Reading Terminal, if you like your local supermarket, and you like to see farmers well paid, and you have no humanity for people who are suffering, just you like farmers, you like supermarkets, you like Reading Terminal, you're horrified by what the Trump administration is trying to do. In addition, if you think about it for more than a second, cutting SNAP, making it harder for people to buy high quality program, is the antithesis of what President Trump is saying with Secretary Kennedy. The whole program there, Make America Healthy Again, has been based on eating well. And here's what Secretary Kennedy says: when children have access to fresh, nutritious food, we don't just feed them for a day, we set them on a path to lifelong health. By putting nutrition at the center of health, we are restoring trust in the public health system and delivering on our promise to make America healthy again. Well, that simply can't work if people can't buy healthy food. Nobody is going to starve to death on the streets anywhere. Before that happens, they're going to buy the cheapest, worst quality food they can possibly get. Highly processed food that's less expensive than fresh quality food. People are going to buy that before they starve to death. And as Secretary Kennedy has talked about, healthy food being what we should be doing, and that's apparently, even though President Trump doesn't follow that advice, he gives that advice. Undercutting SNAP means they're undercutting their own program, and they're really making it clear that they don't believe in it. Now, one of the things that I was surprised at, and I don't know how many of our viewers or our readers follow this, but there's been for many, many years bread lines and all types of ways of trying to help people with food during Great Depressions, during downturns. There have been poorhouses, there have been all types of different programs. But it really wasn't until the end of World War II that the United States started looking at food security as an issue for national security. And so they were looking at the draft at the end of World War II and trying to figure out why so many young men, in those days they were men, weren't qualifying for service. They were drafted, they went to this draft board, and they were not healthy enough. So they, did what the government does best, which is they had a study and put people together in a room and they issued a report. But in this case, the report was really shocking. So this is from the Surgeon General in 1944. In connection with studies made for selective service, which is the draft, it was found that 70% of the children who had fair or poor nutrition 10 or 12 years ago were later unaccepted by the selective service. So now it becomes clear if we are in a situation where we need a draft, and after World War II, we didn't have a draft for a while, but then we had it for Korea and Vietnam, and we haven't had a draft since the Vietnam War. But in terms of having healthy people be able to serve in the military, if they don't have quality food, if they don't have nutrition, if they're not able to have a healthy childhood because they're eating reasonably well, they're not going to be healthy enough to serve the country. And so that became clear back in 1944. And as a result of that, there became many different programs to help people with food. it eventually ended up as part of the quote unquote war on poverty that Lyndon Johnson got passed. And that was the beginning of what was called food stamps. There had been other programs prior to that, but that was a real institutionalization. And then it's gone through a number of different changes. It's now called SNAP, and it's now electronic. And it just was a realization that if you wanted a healthy army, if you wanted a healthy workforce, you had to make sure that children got the nutrition they needed in the important ages. By the way, this is tangential to the point, but one of the reasons why we have vitamin-enriched bread is because so many people had rickets. And again, the government looked at that and said, well, these people can't serve in the army. They can't be working in the factories. What do we have to do? So they started insisting that all the bread was quote unquote enriched. I know a lot of our viewers, and based on the people who contact me through Facebook, which are, it's fine. I'm happy to do my best to respond to Facebook. A lot of people think this is a partisan issue. They think it's the Democrats who are all in favor of SNAP, and the Republicans are trying to get people to stand on their own 2 feet. But it's not really a partisan issue. As I said, it's the farmers, it's the ranchers who benefit. It's the people, the small business people who are part of what's called an IGA, Independent Grocers Association, that own their own small supermarkets. In the rest of the state and the rest of the nation, they're not all Acme's or Giants. They're smaller supermarkets owned by a person or owned by a family. So there are 10 GOP senators who have signed on to Josh Hawley, who's I would say he would self-describe as a right-wing Republican, his bill to fund the SNAP program. So there are senators who have joined is the senator from Oklahoma, from Alaska, from Maine, from Tennessee, from Ohio, from North Dakota, from Louisiana, from Alabama, from Ohio, Texas. They've all formed a coalition, and all of those senators are Republicans. Most of them are self-described right-wing Republicans. So it's really not a partisan issue. It's not the Democrats, it's not AOC, it's not Senator Sanders, although they both are advocating for releasing the money for SNAP. It's not just the progressive Democrats or the mainstream Democrats. It is a broad-based coalition of people who understand, again, if President Trump can send money to the bondholders in Argentina to make sure that they don't lose any money, to make sure they don't go hungry, he certainly can make sure the children in America don't go hungry. Other states that have Republican governors, have figured out that they're not going to let this happen. Again, the governor of Virginia, self-described Trumper, said he's not going to let the people of Virginia suffer because the Democrats and Republicans in Washington can't reach a consensus. He's going to release the money. Other states, Louisiana and New Hampshire, are seeking ways to secure necessary funding. California says it's going to call up the National Guard to help with the food banks. Officials from Alaska, New Mexico, and North Dakota are trying to figure out how they can legally use state money to keep the food aid flowing. Now, many of them are afraid if they advance the money that the Trump administration is not going to allow them to take the money to repay the state. And I think, Larry, you had some breaking news about that you wanted to mention.
Well, all we know about this right now is President Trump said this morning on his trip to Asia that, and let me pull up the quote here, we're going to get it done. And what he means is having the SNAP benefits turned on for November.
Right.
We don't know exactly how he's going to do that. There is no more information about that, but that is what he has said.
Well, the cynic in me says the reason why all of those Republican senators are suddenly signing on to this at the pushing back against the Trump administration, as it were, is more of a function of our businesses are losing money because Texas is where you get the bulk of your ranchers and all of that. And these are industries that have already lost a lot of money because of the crackdown on immigrants. Because, you weren't seeing, able-bodied white men out there picking those vegetables. It was immigrants that they were paying a disgustingly low amount of money that have now decided that they're going to self-deport and let you pick those vegetables yourself, which is why many of them are dying on the vine. Now, what I had heard earlier was that they were trying, that a Republican senator was trying, and I can't remember, it was one of the ones from Texas, John Thune, I believe, was trying to negotiate with Democrats to try to peel some of the Democrats off for a quote unquote clean bill. Now, a clean bill in this case would mean that they would be allowed to do whatever they wanted to do with the Affordable Care Act and with Medicaid. And that is a non-starter for a lot of people. So what we see now is low-income families and people in need of health insurance being pitted against each other.
Right, and also the federal workers. I think that's very astute, and I think what you're saying calls attention to the cynical outlook of some of our elected officials. I will say that I know, for example, the Philadelphia Unemployment Project, a number of pastors and preachers are planning a fast outside of Senator McCormick's office for 2 days after Election Day next week. And I'm thinking that a number of these senators are getting a lot of the Christian coalition to start speaking out about Christ's call to feed the poor and to feed the hungry. And, it's not my faith, so I'm not the right person to talk about the calling. But I do know a number of the pastors who feel in their hearts this calling that they cannot be silent. Because why is this happening? Why would the federal government fund bondholders in Argentina and not put money into feeding children in the low income parts of the country? And, we've had government shutdowns before. We've had longer ones than this. SNAP has never gone unfunded. It's always been funded. There are a bunch of the Trump supporters who are using social media to lie about who receives SNAP, just like they lie about who the Democrats are trying to get help for the ACA. But the fact is, the federal government, which is controlled by Trump and is not particularly straightforward about facts and numbers, they say that the largest group of people who receive SNAP, they categorize as white. And they say 89.4% of the SNAP recipients not only are American citizens, but were born in the United States. So the rest, because again, President Clinton made it illegal for people who are not citizens to get SNAP, the rest of the 10.6% are people who have become citizens but weren't born. So the largest group are white people, and 90% of the people were born in the United States, born citizens. Now, I know Trump wants to do away with the fact if you're born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. But right now, that's the way the law is. These people who he's cutting off are all citizens. Now, so why are they doing it? Well, here's what they write. Again, this is not what I'm saying. Here's what they write. Bottom line, the well has run dry. At this time, there will be no benefits issued November 1st. We are approaching an inflection point for Senate Democrats. They can continue to hold out for health care for illegal aliens and gender mutilation procedures, or reopen the government so mothers, baby, and the most vulnerable among us can receive critical nutrition assistance. So they are purposely withholding food from children to try and force the Democrats to vote the way that Trump wants them to. It's simply blackmail. It's simply taking advantage of the weakest among us, holding them hostage and saying, we're going to harm these people unless you give us what we want. The fact that this statement, and this is a USDA statement from the government, is completely untrue and seriously diluted is almost besides the point. Again, that's a separate discussion and tangential about what the truth is, but they expose themselves. They're not even hiding. They're saying, look, we're going to purposely harm these people unless you, the Democrats, do what we want. It's not like we don't have the money. It's not like we can't do it. It's not like it's impossible to do. They acknowledge that there's an emergency fund. They can find money to rebuild the ballroom on the East Wing. I guess it's no longer the East Wing, what used to be the East Wing of the White House. They can find money for sending stormtroopers into neighborhoods to round up people who are citizens and lock them up. They can find money to do all of these things, including send President Trump to play golf. But they say they can't find the money to feed children. Well, they're not saying that. They're not saying we can't find the money. They're saying we're not going to use the money that we have unless the people vote the way the President Trump wants them to vote. Unless the United States Senator agrees with Trump, poor children aren't going to get breakfast. They're not going to get lunch. They're not going to get dinner. And that's where things stand. And again, just like the ACA, I want to point out that of the 4 counties where people receive the highest percentage of SNAP, 3 of the 4 counties voted for Trump overwhelmingly. Cameron County, Fayette County, and Luzerne County. 20%, 23%, 21%. Trump's vote, 74.5%, 68.7%, 59.2%. The very people who put him in office, who need SNAP the most, are the ones who are going to be most hurt. And I'm not sure those people at this point are speaking out. And that, to me, remains the question, why aren't they? Just to follow up the conversation about who benefits and who doesn't. 3 of the 4 counties with the lowest percentage of SNAP recipients, Chester, Montgomery, and Center County, which is where Penn State is, they all voted for Harris. So when you look at the people who don't need SNAP, who are going to be not hurt as much, 3 of the 4 counties voted for Harris. Now, it is true that Philadelphia has the largest percentage of people receiving SNAP and voted for Harris. But 3 of the top 4 counties, in terms of percentage of people who get the SNAP benefit, voted for Trump. 3 of the 4 top counties voting for Harris have the lowest percentage of people receiving SNAP. And that's kind of where it is. You know, again, I want to, as much as I can, make it clear that the state of Pennsylvania is doing nothing. The other states are going ahead and saying, hey, we're going to call up the National Guard, we're going to release the money, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And in Pennsylvania, it's even worse because we haven't passed our budget. So there's money in the budget to help the give food away, to help all of the programs that where people are going to end up going to try and get food. But they're not funded because the state hasn't funded. There's a program which allows the food banks to buy food from the farmers. That program's not funded. There's money directly to the food banks. That program's not funded. So for Pennsylvania's, it's really a double attack. It is the SNAP benefits end, and the programs that should have been in place to help buttress the food pantries are not funded. And I know, Larry, you wanted to talk a little bit about what people can do, but it's really one of those things where it has to be Senator Fetterman, the Democrat, Senator McCormick, the Republican. It has to be Governor Shapiro, who are all working together to get the money. For every dollar, for every meal that a food bank supplies, SNAP supplies 8. SNAP is what lifts people out of poverty. Food banks are a necessary evil, but you have to go to them. You can't shop at them. You can't live a normal life if you have to wait online at a food bank, at a soup kitchen. These are great institutions. These are wonderful people who are dedicating their lives to helping people, but it's not the same as getting your benefit, which you are entitled to.
Yes.
You are entitled to this, and you should be getting it. And for the Trump administration to try and force people to vote the way that President Trump wants, by holding the children of the United States hostage, by making those children suffer to try and get what he wants, is cruel and inhumane. And the fact that Senator Fetterman and Senator McCormick are not out there on the front line, like Senator Hawley and the other Republicans, is shameful. It's just shameful.
All right, let's
Sorry,
bring in.
I got a little overworked there.
Well, I think we all feel the same way. Let's bring in Vanessa Marie Graber here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hey guys, I just wanted to share information about the lawsuit in which our state is involved in. Governor Shapiro joined a coalition of 25 states and the District of Columbia and suing the Trump administration for unlawfully suspending SNAP. The lawsuit argues that while normal appropriations for SNAP have lapsed because of Republicans in Washington, who control both Congress and the White House, failed to pass a federal budget, alternative funds do exist and must be used to fund the program. And this is according to the press release from Josh Shapiro's office. And in Pennsylvania last year, approximately 714,000 children and 697,000 seniors relied on SNAP every month. And I have some data here from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And so folks want to look up at their state. They have state-by-state fact sheets about SNAP. And so again, as folks are looking to do advocacy and research about this issue to understand where the need is, and especially for nonprofits who may not be doing work around this, but are looking to be part of the solution, this can provide some really good information and resources. But in last year's federal fiscal year, SNAP reached more than 2 million Pennsylvania residents. 58% of SNAP participants are in families with children. More than 44% are in families with members who are older adults or disabled. More than 43% are in working families. And nationally, more than 62% of SNAP participants are families with children. And so I just, again, want to offer a reframe. Like we often say low income, but some of these people, right, children, they're no income, right? They are experiencing hunger. They are experiencing poverty. Let's also talk about people who are unemployed, who aren't necessarily quote unquote low income people, because, they're maybe higher income earners, but when you become unemployed and laid off or in between jobs, or you're like maybe a freelance worker and the market's not very stable, people do look to SNAP to fill in the gaps when they're in between jobs. And really, this is a bigger conversation around poverty nationally and hunger. And so again, there are many people saying things like, oh, they should get back to work. Well, again, as you saw with the statistics I just read, children, disabled people, seniors are not able to work. And for the people that are eligible to work, the majority of them are actually employed. And so it's a shame for these laid off federal workers who maybe never had the opportunity to apply for SNAP at all. They're in a really, really vulnerable position. And so what I've been seeing circulate on social media are businesses that are offering free meals to kids or a discounted menu. I'm seeing a lot of the churches who typically do food distributions across the city ask people to open up their cupboards and bring in food for the month of November, where people will be especially vulnerable, and listing drop-off sites and donation collection points across the city. So if you don't know where to look in your neighborhood. I'm in East Kensington. St. Michael's right around the corner has a food pantry, and so I'm definitely going to be looking in my cupboard and putting a box together to be able to share with that food pantry. There's also many schools, after school programs that will be in need of supplemental food and donations. But really, call around to your families, call around to your neighbors, get together and see who needs what. A lot of people who work at the food pantry say that folks, even though they're well-meaning, provide items that people can't really use. We saw this a lot happening with the food distribution happening in Gaza. They were giving people items that required water when there wasn't water or electricity. In the case of food pantries here in Philadelphia, they often see items that are unhealthy, right? Like a lot of high sugar, high fat, highly processed foods. And so they are in need of healthy food. So if people have extra produce, if they have community gardens, if they have backyard gardens, now's the time to see if you can share more of those items. Of course, perishable items are hard to come by, but things like milk and eggs are always needed by families. Canned goods they will always accept, except, sometimes they tend to be a little bit unhealthier, but they do have a long shelf life. And I think this is a problem that's going to go beyond the, the temporary pause in SNAP benefits, as, more and more people are finding the cost of living and the cost of food to be too high for them to be afford. This is, of course, the main platform of mayoral candidate Zoran Mandani. Again, just talking to people on the streets of New York who time and time again are talking about the high cost of living, the high cost of food. And so even if President Trump restores SNAP benefits, I still think that we are having a growing problem with hunger across the nation, but especially in our rural areas, as Lance just pointed out with that data. And so, again, I think we have said it a few times on the show, looking back at that poverty plan that was created in Philadelphia back in 2020, and thinking about maybe updating that plan or creating a new one for the next 5 years. Because again, the cost of living has increased dramatically since that original plan was created. So if you have extra food in your cupboards, please consider donating to the many food pantries and organizations that are collecting donations. You can fund organizations like Philabundance and others if you don't actually have food to share, but you want to send donations. And if you don't have any money and you don't have any food, you can certainly help volunteer and package up the food. There's always a need for volunteers to create boxes and work in the food banks to help, get all of those items together for needy families.
And speaking of places where people can get help, and we are going to put all this information in tomorrow's post-show newsletter. So this will all be available to everybody tomorrow morning. I want to just mention a couple of things here. To find information about where you can get assistance, you can call 211 or visit pa211.org to find local food banks and other food assistance programs. Oh, this information came from a good friend. Feeding Pennsylvania is another website where you can go and find information. The Share Food program will have a list of food banks and other sites and the times where you can go and get assistance here, and it tells you all the different places, the location, Saturday 10 to 12, that kind of stuff. Philabundance, I would recommend going to their website and taking a look at their features. The City of Philadelphia Food and Meal Finder and the Montgomery County Food Resources page. One thing I want to mention, if people go to phila.gov, which is the city website, /food, what will come up is it's a map, and it has little dots on it and shows you all over the city different kinds of food assistance programs, food sites, general meal sites, older adult meal sites, student meal sites, and food assistance and benefits. If you just put your address in, it'll find the closest places to you. And if you click on them, it will show you the hours and the exact location and what they do. So there are some decent resources out there. The city's done a good job putting these things together. I would look at all these things because there's a chance that they're all not comprehensive. They all don't have every site. So if you look at them and make a list of what's really close to you, you're going to find some things. There are a lot of people out there who are trying to help, who want to help. So, this is the best thing we can be doing right now, is sharing this information and sharing it with your friends and neighbors, anybody who you think could find this useful. And like I said, tomorrow we're going to have this all packaged. It's going to be in the email. Everyone can get a look at it. So it's It's
Yeah,
really
we should share some information on our social media as well. There's two more resources I want to add. That's the Share Food Program, and MANNA, MANNA. It has Find a Food Pantry near me. And if you're one of our listeners in South Jersey, because our WPPM signal does reach Camden County, I would encourage you to check out the Food Bank of South Jersey. They serve 130,000 residents across South Jersey. And then if you are in Delaware, they have the Food Bank of Delaware.
okay. So that's where we are with this. We're going to be staying on top of this. Now, again, there are bills in the Senate brought up by Republicans to fund the SNAP program. The president said this morning that it was going to be handled. We don't know what that means. So there's a little bit of reason for optimism that maybe this does happen before Saturday, when all these cuts would take effect. We'll see. But if not, hopefully some of the things we mentioned here are a good start. So there's something else going on. Next week, we have an election. And what I would like to do is just sort of get everybody up to speed on what we're talking about here when we're talking about the election and what races are up. And I'm going to try to bring up my slideshow. There we go. Can everybody see that? So we have the 2025 judicial races coming up, and there's a lot of offices, and nobody knows what they mean. So I had to go and look it up myself because it is kind of a hassle. So what you'll see here, let me pull it up here on my notes so I know what I'm looking at. I think I closed my notes.
Well, this is how the Supreme Court, the hierarchy of Supreme Courts. And so these are all of the different courts that we have in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the highest court, of course, is the Supreme Court, going down to Superior and Commonwealth, the Court of Common Pleas. But more than likely, if you are Philadelphian, you might have found yourself in one of the many minor courts.
Yeah, and starting from the bottom, the minor court in Philadelphia is the municipal court, and they handle a lot of the smaller things. So why don't we just go through them all, and I'll show you what they are. In Philadelphia, the minor court's the municipal court. It decides if serious cases are sent to the Court of Common Pleas. They also handle preliminary matters such as hearings and arraignments, and in some cases, they'll set bail. They basically handle issues under $12,000, like if you're going to make a claim. In other parts of the state, they have something called the Magisterial District Justice, which is also an elected position, 6-year term. And interestingly enough, you do not have to be a lawyer to get that position. But in Philadelphia, municipal court is an actual judge. The Court of Common Pleas is the next court up. This is the one that I think everybody thinks of when they think of a city judge. This is the General Trial Court of Pennsylvania. There are about 460 Common Pleas court judges across the state in 60 statewide districts. They handle appeals from minor courts, and they also do a lot with children and families. And you're going to see a handful of people running for that spot as well as municipal court. Now, this is where I think people's eyes start to glaze over when we start getting to the higher courts. Commonwealth Court is a panel of 9 judges. They're responsible for matters pertaining to state and local government. They are the trial court for lawsuits against the Commonwealth, and cases are usually heard by panels of 3 judges. So you're probably not going to have a criminal case going to Commonwealth Court. They handle state issues. Somebody brings a lawsuit against the state, they deal with it. Superior Court is kind of on the same level as the Commonwealth Court, but they handle a different set of cases. So there's 15 judges on this. They are often the final arbiter of legal disputes. So if something in Common Pleas advances to that level, usually Superior Court is where the final decision will be made. They hear the appeals for criminal and civil cases for Common Pleas, and they hear appeals on matters involving children and families. And then we get to the state Supreme Court, 7 justices. They receive over 3,000 requests for appellate review per year. 3,000. They hear appeals from Commonwealth and Superior Courts. They automatically hear some appeals specifically when a death sentence is issued. So there's an automatic set of appeals when the death penalty is invoked. They can request to intervene in a lower court proceeding, and they hear requests regarding illegal detention. So when you're going in to vote, now you have an idea of what these judges do and what they're asked to do. But how do you decide who to vote for? One of the weird quirks of Pennsylvania, and probably other states, is that really a judge, in a way, can't really campaign. They can't go out and tell you what they're going to do. That would create problems for them when they actually do sit on the bench. So really all you can go off of is their background and their experience. And, you know, when we're sometimes in Philadelphia, when you have a common pleas court race, there could be 20 or 30 names on the ballot. So how do you know which ones to vote for? Well, the Pennsylvania and Philadelphia Bar Associations make recommendations on judicial candidates. And their evaluations are based on criteria such as legal ability, experience, temperament, administrative ability, integrity, and devotion to improvement of the quality of justice. And if you go to the Philadelphia Bar Association website or the State Bar Association website, they will list all the judges, and they will tell you if they're highly recommended, which is the highest grade they give, recommended, which is the middle grade, or not recommended. So there are three sets of grades that are 3 grades that you can get. There's only one candidate in the entire Commonwealth who I believe got a highly recommended. Everyone else got recommended or not recommended. So we probably won't go through it all here tonight, but that is a good place to even just have a cheat sheet when you go to vote, who's recommended, who's not recommended. It's really one of the best things you can do to determine, you know, which judge you're going to vote for. So I'm just going to show you the ballot really quick. This is what your fall ballot is going to look like when you go in next week. You'll see that you have Judge of the Superior Court at the top. And the reason for that is because the Supreme Court and the other Superior Court judges are up for what's called a retention vote. So in Pennsylvania, when you're a judge, you don't run for re-election, you run for retention. And it's a yes or a no. Usually, judges are retained. The one time we saw that they weren't retained was a few years ago when there was the pay raise controversy. Everybody kind of got kicked out. But usually they do get retained. So starting with the Superior Court, here are your candidates for what party line they're on. Commonwealth Court, what party line, and then Court of Common Pleas down here. And then your municipal court judges at the very bottom. Over here, you will see your retention votes, yes or no. And then for the Common Pleas Court retentions and the municipal court retentions. So it's just a yes or a no vote. And again, you can find the recommendations of the Bar Association on their website to help you determine what you want to do. The last thing I want to show you here is if you go to the Philadelphia Atlas on phila.gov and you put your address in, it will show you this ballot that, you know, can you put your address in and it will show you what your ballot is. So there's a lot here to look at and a lot to figure out before you go in. Although this Common Pleas election is not as bad as Common Pleas elections we've seen in the past. There have been a lot of candidates on the ballot. It's hard to know which one is which. Unfortunately, usually what ends up happening is the candidate with the best ballot position usually just wins the election. So hopefully in this case, people will go out there and see who's on the ballot. They will read the recommendations of the Bar Association, and hopefully that will help you make your decision. There's also other races on the ballot. Denise,
Yes.
what else is happening?
Well, probably the biggest election of the ones that are remaining. You have the Philadelphia Controllers election. Christy Brady is running for re-election, and while that election will probably not generate a whole lot of heat, the district attorney's election probably will. If the names that I'm about to tell you sounded all familiar, it's because Judge Pat Dugan and incumbent DA Larry Krasner ran against each other for the Democratic nomination for district attorney. Now, when Dugan was asked, was he going to run as a Republican when he initially ran against Krasner in the primary, he said no, he wouldn't. Fast forward to a few months ago, he changed his mind and decided to run as a Republican. And he's been, and campaigning for this particular race has been weirdly non-existent until you started hearing things a couple of weeks ago when Kata Scott disappeared and was eventually found murdered. She has become a campaign issue. I don't know how much traction Judge Dugan has gotten on this, but there have been commercials I have seen where Miss Scott's death has basically been blamed on the district attorney and his policies, when if you read my column in Monday's Hall Monitor newsletter, you will see that City Council is about to hold hearings into how Kata Scott ended up connecting with the person who is accused of killing her, and the fact that, you know, the DA may have some responsibility for this, but he's not alone at all because this is a mess. But that's probably the race that most people are looking at right now. And that's because, just like with the judicial races, these are what I call criminal justice elections, because these are the people who will decide whether or not what you are accused of is a misdemeanor, or whether or not what you're accused of rises to the level where you could be doing serious time in jail. So like I said, right now, there's not a whole lot of campaigning going on. Krasner hasn't even consented to a debate with former Judge Dugan, and no one seems to be pushing for one. It's oddly quiet, unless you're on social media.
Right. Well, I mean, they already did this in
Well,
the primary.
Well, they may have already done it in the primary, but the thing is, this is the general election. And you would think that, somebody would want to know what either of these people are going to do should they become the next district attorney, or if they are retained as district attorney. But it's been weirdly quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there hasn't been a debate either, which I think is really important, right? Is to have debates where, again, if you missed an opportunity during the primary, especially if you're a Republican and you weren't paying attention to the Democratic primary debate, this is, an opportunity for them to share their ideas for criminal justice policy. Going back to the Kata Scott case, I just want to reiterate the importance of voting for judges, because one of the major components of that case is the suspect who was arrested in connection with the murder of Kata Scott. His name is Keon King, was arrested for kidnapping another victim, last year. That when he went to trial, when he was arraigned, a judge is the one who sets bail. And one of the issues of contention is that the district attorney's office asked for a much higher bail than what the judge set. The judge set a bail amount, I believe, $200,000. I believe the district attorney was asking for $1 million, and his family was able to bail him out with $20,000. Again, this is another instance where, having a judge, that is going to do the right thing is really important. I think the other element in that case is how frequently victims, are scared or intimidated into not showing up for court, and that's the reason why those charges were dropped. And so I think there's a lot of really important things to look at. There's a lot of misinformation about what happens at the district attorney's office. Just so much. A thing that happens regularly is that witnesses, including the Philadelphia police, don't show up to testify. And when they are the main witnesses in a crime, it is very difficult to prosecute. The other thing that a lot of people say is that it's the district attorney's fault that there's all this crime. Well, I think there's a lot of research on what the root causes of crime were. And certainly there was a lot of crime in Philadelphia before the district attorney took office. Also, the rate of violent crime has gone down. However, the ways in which crime is covered in the mainstream media would often, make you think that there was more crime than there actually was. I was actually just reading a study from the Center for American Progress, which says that despite media attention on gun violence, a new analysis from the CDC shows that rural counties persistently have some of the highest rates of gun violence in the country. So I think there's just a lot more than studying the candidates, right? You actually have to look at more information about criminal justice, about crime, than just the candidates themselves, because it's such a divisive issue here in Philadelphia. And what I see, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and I read a lot of social media content, and there's just, again, we have to always go back to the basics here at the Hall Monitor. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the judges work, how the district attorney works, right? Like how the criminal justice process all fits together. And I also want to know another important statistic, which is that 1 in 3 adults in Philadelphia have been through the criminal justice system. And so that's why it's so critical that we look into the judges and the district attorney candidates and really do our homework before we enter the ballot box.
And Vanessa, just right off that, I just want to mention something, and I don't have the exact information at my fingertips, but the number 1 county in Pennsylvania for gun violence incidents is Philadelphia. However, number 2 and number 3 are, and I can't remember the counties, but they're the 2 most rural counties in the state. And they're only behind Philadelphia by a fraction of a percentage. It's really, and when I learned that, I was shocked, and I had to double check it. And I double checked it with, I believe, one of the statewide organizations that deals with gun violence. They said, oh, this is absolutely right. That's always the case. It's always rural counties that are way higher than people believe per capita. And, so again, you're right. There is this fundamental misunderstanding about what crime really is, what gun violence really is, and where it's happening.
Yeah, and I also want to note something about those statistics around gun violence, is that suicides are actually included in those numbers. And in some counties, especially those rural areas, that is the number 1 way in which people are losing their life from gun violence. It's actually from self-inflicted, like suicide. And so again, these statistics can be manipulated in a lot of ways. I think it's important to look at the data to get a really full picture about what's happening. I also think it's important to look nationwide, right? Like crime was up nationwide during the pandemic and after the pandemic. And then nationwide, it went way down. And just to, again, look at the fuller picture, this is something that's been reiterated by the mayors of Chicago, Los Angeles, Portland, and many other mayors, of course, because the high rate of crime is being used as the reason to send National Guard troops into these cities. And so there is a false narrative that's being created by the White House now around crime statistics. But again, if you look at the data, it clearly shows that nationwide, including Philadelphia, crime is down. And so that being said, I also don't know how much credit the district attorney can take for that, because those are trends that are happening nationally. And so you can't just look at Philadelphia, look at the other cities, look and see what's happening. When I looked at the rural counties data, more than half of the top 10 counties were in the state of Mississippi. What's happening in Mississippi? Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the country. Again, showing one more time that connection between poverty and crime. And so I do just want to I have these slides just to remind people real quick. Allison, if you could bring up my slides. This is just a snapshot. Again, this is your cheat sheet. District attorney, city controller, judge of elections, inspector of elections. Now, many of those are going to be write-in candidates for the last two. There's not a lot of people running for that. Judge of Superior Court, vote for one. Judge of Commonwealth Court, vote for one. Judge of the Court of Common, you have to vote for 11. That means bring an index card. Put your names on there, If you're not doing a mail-in ballot, if you're going into the polling place, you have to vote for 11. That's a lot of people. Municipal court, you got to vote for 4. Here. Now, I want to just share quickly the difference between the elections for judges and judicial retentions, right? So these elections are just as important, especially here with your Supreme Court. These are all judges that are currently seated. So if they're doing a bad job, it's kind of like a recall, right? We call it a retention election, but it's your opportunity to recall them. There's a couple judges who have made horrible rulings. Again, you can Google these names, look in the news, and you can see news stories about some of these judges and how they've ruled on cases that were controversial. But again, look, please, 14 judges are up for retention. But this judicial Supreme Court election is one of the most important in the entire country. And cases around reproductive rights, gerrymandering, and voting rights are going to come up. There's a big case that's going to come up around the rights of people who are being paroled. And so those are all things that are going to be considered by our Supreme Court next year. And what happens is if they don't get voted to be retained, then there will be a special election next year to vote new people in. And then lastly, again, find your polling place. The polling places are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can call this number if you don't have access to the internet. When I was doing voter outreach, a lot of people didn't have computers in their homes, and I couldn't tell you how many cracked phone screens I looked at. So call this number, 215-686-1590. If you want to look for your polling place and you can't find it. That map is a little hard to utilize on a smartphone. And so having a phone number, I think, is really important for differently abled people. And lastly, your mail-in ballots. I think they sent out around 60,000 mail-in ballots. They've only received about 3,000 back, according to the board of, the Board of Elections. I saw an interview yesterday where one of the commissioners talked about that. That means the majority of people have not returned their mail-in ballots. So right now it's too late to mail it. If you mail it now, it's probably not going to make it. So you can take it to the Board of Commissioners offices, one of the satellite locations, and one of the green boxes. And they said to make sure that you put it inside the secure envelope. So you have to actually put your mail-in ballot in 2 envelopes. One's a yellow one, the second one's a white one. Make sure you sign it and you date it. And the Board of Elections has a list of names of people who improperly filled out their mail-in ballot. Now, you can go to the Board of Elections website. You can look for the locations of these drop-off sites. You can look up your name if there is a problem. And you can bring your ballot to a polling location uncompleted if you're not able to make it to a drop-off site.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Denise. And thank you, Lance. Next week will be our election review special. So we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.